Thank you for joining us for Planning a Productive Meeting. I'm Andy King with the Corporation for National and Community Service in Washington, D.C., and I'll be your host. Joining me are Bethany DeSablin and Joanne Lau from our production team at Education Northwest. You'll see all of us in the chat and the Q&A to help address any questions that you might have during the session. This session, Planning a Productive Meeting, is one that's important for AmeriCorps Vista members. Meetings can be an effective way to inform, collaborate, and make decisions, but meetings aren't always the answer to everything. This session helps you know when a meeting is the right solution and then shows you how to plan a meeting so that it is successful. Let's take a look at our goals for this session. We hope that by the end of the webinar, you'll be able to identify when a meeting is needed, and conversely when it's not, that you'll be able to recognize the key components of an effective meeting, that you can identify 3 types of meetings that you may encounter in your AmeriCorps Vista role, and finally, that you'll have a sense of how to manage the logistics of a meeting, whether that meeting is held in person or at a distance. Now it's my pleasure to introduce and to welcome our main speaker, Jewel Holly Ware. Jewel is the president of Jewels of Success, which is a boutique training and consulting firm committed to expanding the competencies and confidence of individuals both professionally and personally. Some of you may have met Jewel through PSO, as she is the regional team leader for the Vista Pre-Service Orientation and Supervisor Orientation. Jewel has extensive experience coordinating effective meetings in a variety of different contexts. So with that, I'll turn the mic over to Jewel.
Thank you, Andy. It is always good to have an opportunity to work with you, Vistas, as well as the rest of the development teams. Meetings. You can't live with them. You can't live without them. The reality is they are an inescapable fact of life. It takes skill and planning to conduct productive meetings. Meetings where people feel it was worthwhile and something was achieved. Developing this skill will benefit all of our listeners far beyond their national service commitments. I found it helpful at the beginning of a session to explain what is and what is not covered in the session. This really helps set expectations, and interestingly enough, this also works well in meetings. Today, we will be focusing purely on the planning and preparation for both in-person and virtual meetings. I realize that the first few areas are actually the same for both. It covers planning for the meeting, setting up the meeting, and following up after the meeting. This session does not cover running the meeting, which includes process issues, facilitation skills, and understanding group dynamics. Meeting facilitation skills are going to be presented in a later webinar. So for today, let's narrow this topic down even more by quickly reviewing the agenda. Since Vistas are known problem solvers, our first conversation will highlight the need to decide whether a meeting is actually the best use of everyone's time, or if another approach would be more effective. We will clarify what I call the building blocks of a meeting. Establish the purpose of the meeting, craft an effective agenda so people are clear about the expected results, identify the participants, those who should or you would like to attend the meeting. We will then review logistics. They can make or break a meeting, and we all know it's the details that are most likely to trip you up. We will then review the key roles needed to ensure that everything is seamless, especially when it comes to your larger meetings. And finally, we're going to lay out what needs to be included when you follow up after the meeting is over. You'll be surprised how many people overlook or minimize this step, and that can really impact on the results of the meeting itself. To make sure we are all on the same page, let's review what I have found to be one of the most clear-cut and focused definitions of a meeting that I have come across. A meeting is a gathering in which a purposeful exchange or transaction occurs among two or more people with a common interest, purpose, or problem. And that comes from James O'Rourke. So for me, the key word in this definition is being purposeful, being clear about your intent. What is it that you want to accomplish? In order for your meeting to be successful and productive, regardless of the number of people attending, it is essential you keep the purpose of your meeting front and center at all times. I've been involved in planning meetings from 2 individuals to one that had over 900 participants. Keeping your purpose, keeping your focus in mind are key. Otherwise, it is really easy to get off track. This session will help you with the fundamentals of meetings so you can make every meeting as effective as possible. Let's take a few minutes to identify when meetings are helpful. I would like to hear your thoughts about the question, in what situations are meetings the most useful? Please enter your ideas in the chat panel on the right side of the screen and send it to all participants. So that your comments are visible to everyone, please be sure to enter them in the chat panel and not the Q&A panel further down the screen. If you are on a mobile device, you will find the chat feature at the bottom of the participant panel.
All right, so lots of great ideas coming in, everything from planning and collaboration to training and, impacting people's knowledge. A couple folks have said when you need to get input and buy-in from other people. The meeting is an effective, efficient way to communicate with a lot of people, make sure everybody has the same information.
All of those are right on point. And this is an excellent segue because I also saw a comment that said people like to complain about meetings. Is that because they're not productive or something to that extent? And that's an excellent segue into our next slide. One of the biggest time wasters is meeting when a meeting is not necessary. This flowchart comes from the Harvard Business Review, and it lays out key questions to ask yourself before deciding to call that meeting. Have you taken the time to think through the entire situation? If the answer is no, you really haven't had the time to give to it, really you need to schedule some quiet time. Actually put it on your calendar to do some strategic or critical thinking. It's amazing what we can accomplish if we actually take the time to plan it. If there is a shared calendar, you may want to label it just that, strategic planning, because that's what you're doing. Second question, do you need additional input to move forward? So what does that mean? That could include, you might need some additional research, some best practices, some additional examples. You may need to talk to one or two people or contact with them individually. So if the answer is no, if you don't need any additional input, just establish a time frame to complete the work because you've done the preliminary steps that you need to do. 3, to move forward, do you need an in-time or real-time conversation? Let's face it, there are some people that do their best work by having that give and take in real time with another person. If the answer to this question is no, send an email, get the information you need. 4, is a face-to-face needed in this situation? Has there been some challenges in the past with other parties, such as miscommunications, misunderstandings? Have people felt as if they were left out of the loop? If this is not the case, use technology. You may even want to put yourself in the place of key participants and imagine some of the questions that are most likely to surface. Can you answer them? If you can't, at the very least, postpone even considering a meeting until you can. If all of the answers to these questions are yes, that is the time to prepare for a meeting. As we move on to preparing for the meeting, please be clear that the components, the building blocks are the same for any type of meeting. It's the time spent that will vary depending on the size and the complexity of the meeting itself. Clarifying the purpose of your meeting is the first component in having a successful, productive meeting. As the saying goes, if you don't know where you are headed, any road will get you there. Having a clear, well-defined objective will establish the route that you need to take. Mike Murphy, who is a New York Times best-selling author, he is the founder of Leadership IQ, has a recommendation. And he states that you fill in the following statement for every meeting that you conduct. And that statement is, as a result of this meeting, we will have achieved, or you could say we will achieve, blank. That could be we will achieve agreements on how to move forward, or we will have achieved finalizing the new process and onboarding volunteers, for example. Needless to say, if you cannot fill in the blank, if you cannot articulate what the purpose or objective is for this meeting, this is not the time for a meeting. Another benefit of completing this question during the prep phase is that it allows you to now have your introductory part of your meeting completed as well. Because the objective isn't to be kept in secret, to be held in secret. It's for you to share that information. Sometimes it takes longer than you think it would to identify the objectives. And sometimes there are maybe 2 objectives for the meeting. But here is a word of caution. Do not overload your meeting with too many objectives. You can lose focus. It's usually better to have several shorter meetings that are tight and focused than one unwieldy and overwhelming meeting. So now that you've clarified the objective, now comes the question, so what? Why is this objective important? By you identifying the importance and relevancy of the objective now, it really helps you to hone the message to people later in the process as to why attending this meeting is important to them. You always want to be able to frame the message from someone else's perspective, because the reality is everyone tunes in to WIISM. What's in it for me? And you need to be able to get that message across. One strategy that I personally have found to be effective is to identify at least 2 specific outcomes you would like to get from holding the meeting. This provides something tangible for you to measure. You can ask yourself after the meeting, did we or didn't we? Yes or no? Let's get a better sense of what this looks like. Knowing your desired outcome or outcomes can help shape the meeting structure. It helps you to identify who needs to be in the room, as well as providing a quality check on the objectives you developed for the meeting. Case in point, if the stated objectives do not create the setting you need to achieve the desired outcomes, they are not in alignment. If the outcomes are clearly what you need and the objectives don't lead you there, usually the objective needs to be modified. Or sometimes it's a subset and you might have 2 different outcomes that you are looking for. So let me share with you an example. A few years back, I hosted an automatic forum. It was a nonpartisan forum where all of the candidates for the office were invited, and every candidate RSVP'd and they all showed up. Now the objective was for community members to hear directly from all of the candidates and have time for questions to be answered. If you look on the screen, initially, the objective or the outcome identified was we wanted ideally to have 200 people attend, and the minimum was to have 100 people attend. Well, that's a nice outcome, but how did that relate to hearing directly from all of the candidates and actually having time for the questions to be answered? So we identified that we needed to have another set of outcomes, and they all tie together, so we didn't have to change the initial outcome. What we did was we identified that ideally we wanted to have 60 minutes actually used for Q&A. The minimum we identified was we wanted to have at least 30 minutes for Q&A. Why was there that gap? Because some of the candidates were notorious for talking over their allotted time. And it wasn't so much as giving them the opportunity to expound on and on about their platform. It was really about making sure that the people in the audience had their concerns and questions answered. So in this case, we actually had 2 separate yet parallel outcomes that we looked for. So develop the habit of identifying both ideal and minimum outcomes. Why? It helps keep you centered after the meeting, as well as identifying, once again, what needs to be done to generate those outcomes. And also, oftentimes we're so focused on the ideal, we get so disappointed when we don't hit that ideal, we forget how successful we were. So let me give you an example that's outside of the meeting forum for a second. I love my Fitbit. My identified steps per day, 8,000. what I found was if I didn't get 8,000 or I knew I wasn't going to hit out 8,000, my enthusiasm, energy tended to wane. So now I have a minimum and an ideal on a daily basis. My maximum, my ideal outcome is 8,000 steps. My minimum outcome is 5,000 steps. Once I started keeping track of that, I always tend to at least hit the 5,000. Different levels of satisfaction, but nonetheless, keeping in mind the total goal. Now, getting back to the example of the Aldermanic Forum. Since the outcome, the ideal outcome was 200 people in attendance, we decided the outreach had to connect with at least 1,000 people. So our campaign included social media, flyers, attending other organizational award meetings in the city to announce the forum, hand out flyers. We did press releases. We were able to get some public service announcements. I'm happy to say for that outcome, we exceeded the ideal number. We put out 200 chairs. They were all occupied, and a number of people were standing, so it was standing room only. For the secondary outcome, in terms of the time allotted for the candidates to respond to Q&A, I am happy to report we also reached the 60 minutes for that as well. It required staying focused, making sure that people stayed within their time frames. So we, in that situation, it's not always the case, we were able to hit both of the ideal outcomes. But once again, in order to hit the outcomes, you have to make sure you have the setting in place in which to achieve that. You also want to validate your outcomes. That means consider, are they reasonable considering the environment in which you're in, the context, the time of day, etc. Also, get in the habit of doing a reality check, especially when it comes to larger meetings, in conjunction with what's going on in the organization as well as the community. Determine how much preparation your participants and those with key roles in the meeting may need prior to the meeting. For example, with the forum, we had a practice of what's called a dry run session with our volunteers prior to the actual event to make sure that everyone was clear about their responsibilities and what those looked like in action. So that's just a general example. Once you've identified the meeting purpose as well as the desired outcomes, it really makes it so much easier to select an appropriate meeting format, which is designed to help you move forward toward your goal. As Vistas, you are involved in all types of meetings: volunteer orientation, status updates, planning, performance reviews, partnership meetings, just to name a few. Regardless of the type of meeting, there are formats that you can follow. We are going to cover 3 of the most commonly used formats: informational, where you're just providing content; problem solving, where there's something you're trying to resolve; and creating buy-in. Before we continue, let's be clear. You may hold meetings that combine formats. It's not an either-or type of situation. It may help us to get a sense of the types of meetings you're conducting. So of the 3 types we will be covering in this session, what type of meeting do you conduct most often, or do you anticipate conducting most often? Is it informational, problem solving, or creating buy-in for a process or an event of some kind. Please make a selection on the poll.
All right, and as Jewel mentioned, just click the radio button next to your choice, whether it's informational meeting, problem solving, or creating buy-in. Be sure to click the submit button. It's in the lower right corner of that poll panel. We'll have it open for just another couple of seconds, and we'll close the poll, and then it'll take just a moment for those results to tabulate.
So, Andy, while we're waiting for the results of the poll, you know what I have always found interesting, and this happens regardless of the topic. But in this case, once people learn more about the mechanics of meetings, it's always surprising how much more conscious of how meetings are conducted they become. For example, I would dare say that the next meeting the VISTAs online attend, the more likely they're going to think about, was the meeting purpose clearly stated? What type of format is being used? Is there a flow to the meeting? You know, people often find they pay a lot more attention to elements that hadn't even crossed their minds before, and they realize that those individuals that they see as being effective, they actually are following a lot of the steps that we're covering today. Have you found that to be true, Andy?
Yep, I think that's very true. Once your eyes are opened, then you can't not see it. So, I think this will be really helpful to VISTAs, and they'll be seeing ways to improve meetings all over the place. So we've got our results. Let's take a quick look at them. It seems like out of those who did respond, the largest number, 53 of you, said that informational meetings are the type that they conduct most often. Right behind that was problem solving, and then the smallest of the three was meetings that are seeking to create buy-in. So thanks to everybody who participated in the poll. We appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you. And the reality is, informational is one of the most common types of meetings that are being held on a day-to-day basis in this country. Let's first look at, just a couple of examples of when VISTAs oftentimes use informational meetings. For some of the newer VISTAs online, some of you may have oriented your staff at your projects about the AmeriCorps VISTA program. Oftentimes, this is extremely helpful if you are the first VISTA at that site. For others of you that have been on site a few months, maybe your supervisor has asked you to update one of your partners or the board of directors on the status of some projects you've been working on. So I'm sure that this is going to be a good review for some of you just in terms of the process to follow, the format itself. So one, identify and organize key points. Make sure that the information is current and up to date. Make sure that the structure is easy to follow. That could be something like in the past, we've done this. Presently, we're doing this. And future steps will be this. So past, present, future is a structure that oftentimes people use. When you are organizing your key points, you always want to make sure that you're conscious of the time frame. How much time has been allotted to you? Because the amount of information, of course, that you can cover in 5 minutes is very different from that you can cover in 15 minutes. Present the information that you want to share visually, if at all possible, because that really increases the retention rate. So you may want to use PowerPoint, Some people, especially for your larger presentations or talks or meetings, use all on the wall or whiteboards or diagrams. If this involves a change of some kind, you really want to have handouts available so people can refer back to the information after the meeting is over. You always want to have a Q&A structured during the meeting when you are sharing information. If some questions surface that can't be answered, you always want to explain the process to get back to them with the answer. So for example, if someone asks you something and you're not completely sure, you could say something like, you know, I am not 100% sure of that answer. Please write down the question and I will get back to you within 48 hours or 24 hours. You may want to say, we decided the easiest way to get back to people with questions or follow-up information is by email. If you would prefer a phone call, let us know if that's something that you are comfortable with. What I've also found helpful when you're doing informational meetings, especially if there aren't any questions forthcoming, you could tell by the facial expressions that there might be some questions. You might say something like, a question I've had in the past, or I found that an area that people have some concerns about is, you answer that question and you will find that that tends to trigger more questions to surface. Because once again, in informational, we really are trying to get clarity. We're trying to get understanding. And so the more questions people can ask, the better. We are now moving on to what is called the problem-solving meeting format. At the end, I am going to share an example of this. So first, define and clarify the definition of the problem. You know, that sounds really simple and clear-cut, but it usually takes a lot more time. You know, it's been said a problem well-defined is a problem half solved. Oftentimes, in meetings, the success isn't as high as it could be because the problem was not well-defined. So make sure that you spend the necessary time to define, clarify exactly what is meant, what is included, what is involved in this problem statement. To brainstorm options for solving the problem. Now, you know, interestingly, brainstorming is a term that is often used. Sometimes I've seen people's eyes just kind of roll back in their heads when they hear the term brainstorming, but it is a really effective tool. What's important is that you realize brainstorming is really comprised of 3 different stages. The first stage is what's called ideation. It's where you just want people to come up with as many ideas as possible. The focus on the first stage really isn't about quality, it's about quantity. It is about getting as many items as out there. It's important that during a problem-solving meeting that you have someone that is capturing all of the options where everyone can see them, whether that's a whiteboard, whether that's a chart of some kind. It needs to be large. It should not be someone sitting down at a table writing it out on a notepad, because that minimizes the effectiveness of the ideation piece. Secondly is the evaluation stage. When you are actually brainstorming, nothing kills brainstorming quicker than people combining the ideation stage with the evaluation stage. They should always be separate. You come up with the options. You do not allow people to say, oh, that will never work. oh, we tried that 5 years ago, because in doing so, it contains that creativity. So in the evaluation phase, it's always helpful to have some key factors that everyone is using in terms of identifying what's going to be effective, or something that we could use. Or maybe we might take an element of this option and an element of this option and come up with something totally new. So some factors you may want to have people consider. Time available. What are the resources we have? How do these ideas fit in with the resources? The values of our organization, the financials needed. So identify some criteria. Then select the solution or solutions that are most fitting. Then plan. How are we going to implement this solution? What's the time frame? Apply the solution, of course. And then always make sure that you go back and do an evaluation of some kind to see whether the problem was solved to the degree that you wanted, or was it partially solved, which means that you need to do something in addition to that particular solution. So, for example, let's say you have been at your site for 1 month, and for the last 8 months, volunteers have been leaving at a higher rate than the past 2 years. So that could be identified as a nonprofit volunteer retention problem. Or through the discussion, it might turn out to be that it isn't necessarily about the retention, it's about the fact that parking, free parking left, and that was a trigger. So you really need to have time around what was the problem. Also, if it is a problem-solving meeting, you want to make sure that you have the perspective of the people that are impacted. So at this meeting, of course, you need to have volunteers in the meeting that can expand the perspective, expand the discussion, and make sure that you are approaching it from a really comprehensive perspective. So that would be an example of problem solving. And then the third format that we are going to be covering is creating buy-in. This is where your objective is to generate movement or action. You want people to take action. You want them to do something related to an issue. At the end, I'll give you an example with this one as well. So to make this happen, first of all, you need to provide attention to the problem by highlighting several specifics related to your topic. To identify the need for action. Oftentimes, individuals think that if I give attention to this problem, people will take action. Not necessarily. You need to be specific in identifying the need for action by adding more context and explaining or giving examples of why this is urgent in order to get the group involved. The satisfaction piece is generated through connecting the practicality of what you're recommending, as well as the motivation for the idea. You're merging, you're connecting those two. And visualization is actually showing the benefits of the changes being proposed, really getting them to see what the result is going to be if they take this action. And of course, action is the last step, and it's achieved by laying out exactly what you want the attendees to do. So let's look at this through a real-world example. There were some school budget cuts, which meant that teaching assistants were cut. So that is where you would bring attention to the area in question, making sure that people, one, knew about the school budget cuts, and two, what that meant. Teaching assistants would be cut across the board. Identifying the need. Well, without the teaching assistants, the ratio would be 1 adult per 30 students. I mean, just think about it. Oftentimes when people just hear the term 1 adult per 30 students, instinctively, they're like, how can that be? How can 1 adult meet the needs of 30 students? The satisfaction is really about pointing out the fact there will be children that will be overlooked. There will be children whose needs are not going to be met, or they will not get the needed attention they need. Visualization, really talking about the difference in the amount of attention that can be given to children when you have 2 to 3 adults in the room, and why it's important that people volunteer in the classrooms. And what I didn't mention in the beginning was the action is you want people to volunteer. Excuse me. And whenever you are trying to generate buy-in, you must ask for the action. You have people in the room with boards for people to sign up. You have information where people can sign up for specific times. What grade levels would they like to sign up for? So what you're doing is, once again, you're identifying the need, you're showing what the gap is, what's the deficiency, what needs to be filled in. You're showing how these actions that you want them to take can help meet that need. So in following this format, it really makes it a little easier. I found that when you have a framework in place, it's always easier to go back and fill in the blanks than starting from scratch. So thinking about the last slide, in your VISTA service, what kinds of situations might you use in meetings to create buy-in? Or what kinds of situations have you already used this format? You just didn't realize that it was a format. Please enter your ideas in the chat panel.
So, Jewel, in the interest of time, I think we're going to need to move beyond this activity so we can continue getting to the rest of the presentation and still have time for the Q&A. So, I mean, we'd love to hear everybody, but I think for each of you, you can reflect on, when in your service you might need to get buy-in, whether it's community members or team members at your organization. And we'll just leave it at that so we can get on and talk about how you set up a meeting and who should be involved. So let's move on to agenda.
All right, let's move on to the agenda. Now that we've covered whether having a meeting is necessary, the purpose of your meeting, and 3 meeting formats, we're going to begin to talk about the items to consider in developing your agenda, or what I like to call your plan of action for the meeting. In preparing your agenda, clearly state the purpose of your meeting, the targeted outcomes, and list what needs to be discussed to achieve those ends. Once you know what your agenda items are, it's important to assign realistic time frames for each one. Make it a habit to underestimate rather than overestimate how many issues a group can handle in a given time frame, what needs to occur in this meeting to achieve the objectives. This also might be a good time to get feedback on the agenda from those familiar with the topic. Once you have your agenda items listed and the amount of time assigned to each, Think about the logical flow from one item to the other. For example, you wouldn't want to discuss the volunteers needed for a new event before you have identified the details and the scope of the event. When fleshing out the agenda, it's often helpful to plan a bit of time at the beginning of the meeting to recap or review what was accomplished and set the context at the beginning of your session. The last time we met, we completed XYZ. It also allows a few extra minutes for people to show up. If your agenda is likely to be complicated or challenging, consider starting with a few easy items for discussion. Although most meetings are between 30 minutes and 2 hours long, few people can really focus their attention for a full 2 hours while sitting still in a chair. Sometimes it's helpful, especially if it's a longer meeting, to have, for example, water or refreshments or beverages on another table, so they have to stand up, get up, walk, move, get their water, and then come back. Speaking of sitting for long periods of time, that reminds me of a common misstep, having people stay for an entire meeting when they are only needed for one section of the agenda. Invite them only for that section. Trust me, it will be appreciated. And of course, if they want to, they can always stay longer. Let's move on and consider possible participants or attendees that need to be invited. For a meeting to be useful, you must have the right people in the room. As you plan your attendee list, consider who will help you to accomplish your meeting goals and those people who will be most affected by the outcome. Also, consider who needs to know the information, who's knowledgeable about the topic, who will be required to implement the decisions made, who could effectively communicate the message to different groups in the community, and who would be an effective ambassador. Identify what information they need and when do they need the information. You may also want to consider inviting the participants who may be approving the results, or they can be an advocate or a champion for the decisions that are made. Remember to invite those people that represent divergent views, who may be critical of your efforts. The questions they pose can actually strengthen the end decision. And last but not least, always be aware of those individuals who may have political status or have a lot of influence in the communities or organizations that you're working with that may impact your success. Depending on the situation, sometimes it's helpful to make a phone call first because some people like that personal touch. Follow up your call with a meeting notice, including the purpose of the meeting, where it will be held, and in some cases, sending a list of participants can be helpful. And also, make sure that you include whom to contact if they have questions. Up to this point in the process, face-to-face and virtual meetings are pretty similar. We're now going to explore some of the differences. So let's start. We are going to continue on and really get started with the information around the virtual meetings. Is that okay, Andy?
That's perfect. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Virtual meetings can be very challenging for participants, and there are additional factors to consider to make them effective. There are a number of questions concerning virtual meetings that need to be investigated or thought through prior to holding a virtual meeting. 1, your first consideration needs to be the communication channels used. Will you need additional people to assist you? And if so, How many channels will be needed? For example, let's consider this webinar. Several channels are being used. You have me, you have Andy, you have the technical support. All of these are different channels. What technology is available to you and the invitees? Are they all involved? Is everyone involved familiar with the technology? And if they're not, what can be done to bring them up to speed? Ask yourself, what will the participants be using? Will they be using computers, tablets, landline, or cell phones? What's the quality of internet service in your facility or where the participants are located? If the signal isn't strong, can you host in another location? Will there be a cost? And if so, what's the cost and can you afford it? Keep in mind, are you going to be connecting with individuals in rural areas because the options may not be as strong? You may also want to consider recording the meeting and making it available to people who are not available or were not able to make the meeting. Is that feature included in the platform that you're using? Try your best to use a platform that's widely accessible and easy to use. If you're holding your meeting on a platform that no one can operate, the meeting is doomed to fail. So if you decide to go with a tool that is not familiar to the meeting participants, discuss how they plan to become familiar with it, and if possible, offer to help them if you can, or provide assistance to them. We are now going to just quickly review a few platforms that are available. As Andy mentioned earlier, this is not an endorsement. This is just providing some additional information for you. Attentive is a decision-making and team collaboration platform. You can start a team chat, submit your input anonymously, seamlessly switch between topics, and get real-time feedback. Zoom is an online video conferencing service that allows users to pull in up to 50 HD video streams at the same time. A WebEx, the free version, allows users to meet and work with 2 other people. Similar platforms include Skype, Meeting, GoToMeeting, and Adobe Connect. GroupMe is a free mobile messaging app that planners can use to coordinate private chats. It works on all device platforms. And Slack, this is a team messaging tool that brings all types of communication together seamlessly, eliminating the need for long email threads and links. I've used all of these except for Attentive and Slack. They've all worked well. GroupMe is super easy to use with Teams. We are now going to move on to virtual meeting tips. It's even more important during virtual meetings to make sure that when you're planning the meeting, you are identifying specific opportunities that you can engage all of the attendees. This is even more important than in face-to-face meetings because it's so much easier for people to check out. Ask periodic questions or ask for thoughts or responses, and call people by name as opposed to general questions. With that being said, let people know ahead of time or at the beginning of the meeting this is going to be part of the process. According to the Harvard Business Review, the lack of face-to-face stimulation shrinks people's attention spans, so plan the bulk of your meeting in 5 to 10-minute segments. That's really important. Include the URL, username, password, and other important access information in your communication. Provide contact email address and phone number in your invitation in case people have difficulty accessing or navigating. Line up a colleague to monitor that email and phone while you are facilitating the meeting. It's even more important to have visuals. So while you're designing the meeting, make sure that there is something for people to look at. Make sure you connect with one virtual attendee ahead of time to test your meeting technologies. Schedule a time to practice initiating the conference call or a video chat, depending on what you are using. I'm continuing on with the tips. Laura Stack, who is the author and president of the Productivity Pro, suggests I'm asking participants to log in at least 15 minutes prior to the start of the meeting to test connectivity. This is especially important the first time you use a platform. I can't tell you how many times I have not gone on 15 minutes ahead of time, and there have been some glitches when attending meetings. Conduct roll call and verify that everything is working. Give out a method to reach you offline should an attendee encounter problems. Identify protocols for the meetings. If you're leading the meeting, make sure there are sufficient pauses after asking a question. If you're a participant, bring attention to yourself before addressing the group by signaling with your hand or saying question or comment, and then waiting a couple of seconds before continuing. Make sure to mute phone if you're in a noisy background. State your name prior to speaking, and make sure there are sufficient pauses after asking a question. According to 5 tips for conducting a virtual meeting, video conference meetings should actually move at a slower pace than a typical meeting due to a 2 or 3 second delay for most systems to communicate it. Let's face it, sometimes even on cell phones, there is a delay. You're already answering because you think the other person has finished speaking and they were just taking a pause. Have a backup plan. What if something goes wrong and you're unable to continue the meeting? In that event, be prepared to tell your colleagues what's happening and decide how you want to proceed, whether that means rescheduling for later, moving to another communication channel, or canceling the meeting altogether. If you can make this backup plan ahead of time, please do so. For example, you might send out a conference call number and tell people you'll switch to that channel in case of emergency. Looking at logistics. The logistics involved in planning a meeting is critical to its success, and it should be a key focus of your planning steps. There are some scheduling tools. Of course, you'll need to think about the date, the time, the length of the meeting, but have you considered the demographics of those attending? For example, seniors tend to prefer meetings during the day or late afternoon. Have you factored that into your decision? If there is an overriding reason that it has to be held later in the day, what can be done? Providing senior escorts is a great idea, where you get volunteers to work with seniors to meetings. Ideally, there are people who live in the community. It's also a great opportunity to pair youth with seniors. If the location is not in walking distance, get volunteers to drive individuals who need it. Consider other events that may be taking place during that time period. Don't forget to consider the schedules of those you'll be inviting. Is it the busy time of the year for possible attendees? For many people, the earlier you can get on their schedule, the better. Scheduling tools can be a great time saver. Here are a few. Of course, there are many more out there. All of these mentioned have a free version. Doodle is a scheduling tool to find a date and time to meet with multiple people. In my experience, it seems as if more people are familiar with or have used Doodle than the other tools. Assistant 2 is a scheduling tool that allows you to book meetings with one email. At this time, it only works with Gmail, and you use it directly from the Gmail platform. You can only schedule 2 people at a time. Calendly is another tool that works with Google, Outlook, Office 365, or iCloud Calendar. TimeBridge is part of any meeting and provides scheduling for both outbound meetings and accepts inbound meetings as well. Continuing on with logistics. In conjunction with the date and time, secure a location. Consider the availability of an appropriate venue that has adequate seating, technology, and other accommodations that meet your needs and are not just popular or familiar. The size of the meeting often determines what type of announcement/invitation will be transmitted. If it's a small meeting in the office and everyone shares calendars, it's just a matter of putting it on the calendar. For large community meetings, it may be more of an announcement. As you're putting your plan together and including timelines, lead times, building in the time to send invitations, to receive responses from others, such as developing the materials or creating and printing information, if that's what you're going to be doing. Do not forget that others may need additional lead time to accommodate your request. Do not forget to consider setup time for signage, seating, tables, and technology. Sometimes transportation options are not considered. Make sure your location is close to public transportation if that is available in your city or town. You may want to consider the cost for participants to attend the meeting. The availability of child care is overlooked, which may make it difficult for some people to attend the event. Providing child care can be a boon to your attendance numbers, and ask yourself if it can be provided free of charge. When selecting refreshments, consider possible dietary needs of your participants. What's often overlooked is the timeline associated with the day of the event. We all know it's important to start the meeting on time. You want to establish a reputation for starting and ending your meetings on time. At the PSO, we discussed starting with the end in mind. This is also applicable to meetings. If the end pictures your meeting starting on time, what needs to be done, and by when in order to start the meeting punctually. Let's say we have a community input session that's scheduled to start at 7 on Monday. Confirm who's picking up or bringing the various items like materials, refreshments, easels, signage, sign-in sheets, cups, and plates, as well as the time they will arrive. Always factor in extra time for travel. Well, in order to start at 7, we have to be ready to go and open the doors no later than 6:30, so we can welcome community residents and allow them to get settled and connect prior to the start time. Of course, if you have 100 or more people attending, you may need to open the doors even earlier, so factor that in. Refreshments will need to be set out before the doors open, so have them set out about 6:15. Plan on having the handouts and materials set out by around 6 o'clock. Depending on the room and how much help you have, you will probably want to start arranging the tables and chairs by 5:45 p.m., so that means you'll need to arrive by at least 5:30. Your own time management methods may be different from this, and that's perfectly fine. The point is that starting on time doesn't happen by accident. You have to plan carefully and work proactively. So let's talk about your initial communication. Invitations, which can have a huge impact on attendance and understanding of the purpose and objectives of your event. Consider inviting your attendees personally, in addition to sending a calendar invitation, especially if there's a chance that the invitation will slip by unnoticed or go into the spam folder. That actually happened recently for an event I was working with. Realize the type and size of your meeting is also going to play an important part. You must think through what needs to be included in the invitation besides the basics, including the agenda, objectives, and outcomes. This helps set the stage for buy-in and a commitment to achieving the outcomes you've identified. Don't forget to include special directions to the event, the availability of transportation, child care, or refreshments. Remember to list the name of the building as well as the address. Oftentimes people don't know the address, but they're familiar with the buildings. Think about the timing of the invitations to make sure that the attendees can plan to attend the event, change their schedule if needed, or make arrangements for child care. You may also want to weave into the invitation that the event will be starting and ending on time. Make sure to allow time for attendees to return their RSVP so you can use the information to plan for your event. We suggest you send out reminders at least 48 hours in advance, and the reminders should again include the basic information related to the event. Your work isn't done when the invitation is sent. Additional arrangements might be required given the meeting's logistics and responses. For example, you may need to order additional supplies, refreshments, or make other accommodations based on the number of people attending. We're now going to take a minute or two and look at roles. Assigning roles to other people can really go a long way in helping a meeting run smoothly and achieve its objectives. Having a recorder. A recorder captures the key points, ideas, and decisions that result from the meeting. They may also draft the post-meeting notes. Having a timekeeper helps track time spent on each agenda item and moves the discussion along to the next item. It's also helpful to identify specific cues that the timekeeper is going to use in conjunction with the facilitator. And the facilitator role is really one where the group is guided through discussion, problem solving, the different phases of the meetings. The facilitator is really required to play more of a neutral role throughout the meeting. You can also have more than one person playing this role during different times or parts of the meeting. Because of the number of things that need to be done, it may be helpful to identify someone to help you during the event. An item may have been forgotten, or additional chairs may be needed, or other things may come up, where having a helper, a runner, or assistant would be helpful. Follow-up. Follow-up is key. It helps maintain the momentum of the meeting itself. Thank participants and attendees for their input, their interest and participation. Always provide follow-up communication and detailed information about what was discussed and accomplished. And don't forget to include next steps and those responsible for completing those steps. Often, people lose interest if they miss a meeting because they're not sure what's taking place and the status toward achieving the outcomes. It's helpful to provide your next steps and action items to interested parties and to those who were unable to attend the meeting. So based on the agenda, this should be the last slide. But surprise, there is one additional slide. Reflection. It's helpful no matter what you're working on to make sure you take the time out to reflect on what were the results, identify and evaluate what was generated, review all the feedback that was provided, both verbal as well as written, and then pinpoint the lessons that were learned. This will help you avoid repeating a mistake during the meeting, and it also really reinforces those positive actions that were taken to drive, to drive success. Next steps. We've identified the building blocks, the fundamental steps that cannot be overlooked. Identifying a meeting and its purpose, deciding who will need to attend and if the meeting will be in person or virtual, applying one of the meeting formats mentioned in the webinar and realizing that these are just 3 of many. The importance of developing and sending out the invitation for the meeting, which also needs to include the reasons why the meeting is being held and identifying what the outcomes are going to be. And review the resources in the PDF of this webinar. There are a number of resources. There are a couple of templates listed in there as well. So thank you, and I hope you are walking away with a few new ideas in terms of how to organize and conduct a productive meeting.
Well, thank you so much, Jewel. You've given everyone a tremendous amount to think about. We have a few questions that have come in, so we do want to get to those. Also, I'll mention, as you can see, we've got the evaluation poll open on the right side of the screen. If you would take a moment, tell us your thoughts. There are 10 questions, so you'll need to use the scroll bar to get to all 10 of them. And now we're going to move into the Q&A portion. We've got a little bit of time left to do that. I'm going to invite our operator to come back on the phone and give us instructions for those on the phone who want to ask a question. So, Teria?
Yes, if you would like to ask a question on the phone lines, please press *1 and record your name at the prompt. Again, press *1. Please be sure your line is unmuted and record your name when prompted.
All right, and while we're waiting to see if anyone comes in on the phone, we've got a few questions that have come in already. And a couple of those are related to the email announcements or the invitations that go out for a meeting. So first off, Joan asks, should the purpose of the meeting be included in the invitation or presented at the beginning of the meeting, or both?
The answer to that one would be both. Because one, by including the objective, it really clarifies for the person receiving the invitation the importance and the value of attending the meeting. I get invited to a lot of meetings, and it's always easier for me to identify whether this is going to specifically relate to something I'm doing. So yes, please, please, please include in both.
Great. And then Corey has a related question. How often should reminder emails or communications go out after the invitation is sent out? So, how many times or how often? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay, well, once you've sent the invitation and they've responded, I always think it's a nice touch to respond the first time with thank you, we've received your response, or just a thank you, because once again that gives you a chance to remind them of their commitment of coming. I say, depending upon how much time in the notification, I have found I send an email again in 2 weeks. If you send it too far in advance, it tends to get overlooked, people forget, and then send it a week, only a week left. And then depending upon the magnitude, the size of the meeting, I might send another one 3 days out, once again including all of the information like the where, the when, the how, because then it's easier for people to locate that information.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do, of course, with WebEx, you can set up automatic reminder messages. So we blame it on WebEx, but when you sign up for a webinar, you'll get a notice the day before that says, hey, don't forget you signed up this tomorrow. And then the morning of, it's like, it's today, don't forget. So it varies, I think, with whether it's a virtual meeting or face-to-face. But there are lots of different and now easy ways to send those reminders. So, Terry.
Technology.
Oh, go ahead, Jewel.
I was about to say technology is amazing. Technology is my best friend right now.
Yay. So let's turn to the phones. Terry, do we have anybody online with a question?
Currently, we don't have any participants in the queue, but again, to ask a question, please press *1.
All right. Well, we have another question here. And this was talking about the different types of meetings, and one of them you talked about brainstorming. And so this question says, when brainstorming with just 2 or 3 people, is a whiteboard still useful? You know, doing a brainstorming in that modality. So any thoughts on that, Jewel? And your brainstorming team is really small?
Okay, so one, if at all possible, and this may not be, but sometimes it's helpful for people to come in that have limited experience. For some reason, at least six people tends to be like a magical number when it comes to brainstorming. So realizing that right now 3 is your core, see if you can't add a few people. In response to your specific questions, yes, one of the benefits of brainstorming is that when people see the suggestions, the recommendations up in large print, whether that's whiteboard, flip chart, it's something about seeing the items that actually triggers more ideas. So yes, it does need to, even if you just have 2 people, it needs to be posted. Now, let's say, for example, if you write really large and there's just 2 of you, you could technically get a notepad, a large notepad, not one of those small ones, and write really big, but you need to have it really large so people can see it. Because there's something that connects in your brain, and you do not achieve that piece just by writing it down small in a notepad.
Interesting. So part of brainstorming is kind of tapping into the right side of the brain and getting out of just the logical, but making some of those visual connections. Is that right?
Exactly.
Great. Interesting. So yeah, I guess small groups still use a whiteboard or a chart paper or whatever you can. Excellent. So Terry, do we have anybody in queue on the phones?
No, there are no participants in the queue.
All right, thank you. Let's see. We've covered most of the questions here. I'm just doing a quick scan because I think there was another one in here that we may want to check in around. So this one, I think you touched on at the beginning of the session, Jewel. Someone had made a comment in the chat about people liking to complain about meetings, and you gave a little bit about that, but maybe since now we've heard about all the things that go into a good meeting, what would you say we could do? What would be, the 1 or 2 things that a meeting planner can do to reduce the likelihood that people are going to complain about your meeting? Any thoughts?
Yes. Yes, as a matter of fact, I do. Let me take a step back. One of the most often cited complaints of people attending meetings, and this isn't Jewel speaking, it's based on some surveys that are out there. People see it as a waste of time. They don't see anything being accomplished. They don't understand the purpose of the meeting. They don't understand why they were there in the first place. And so if those are 3 of the most common reasons that people complain about meetings, you can see, and this ties back into an earlier question of should you include in your invitation or announcements the reasons for the meeting. When people understand what the overall outcome is, they can then see movement or not. If you are not planning as you should, you're setting the expectations. So number one, set the expectations of what is to be accomplished in this meeting. For large projects, you're not going to accomplish everything in one meeting. It's just not viable. So making sure that people are clear as to what we want to have achieved when we walk out the door. Then it becomes a matter of, did we do it? Did we not? When there's ambiguity, when people don't know what to measure, when people don't know what the bullseye happens to be, they're going to complain because they don't know what they were supposed to have done. They don't know why the meeting was called. And it sounds strange that people don't know, but I talk to professionals every day that still say there was this crazy meeting, I'm still not sure what the purpose was. So if you can identify the purpose, identify the results, and if you have time at the end of the meeting to say something like, well, our goal today was to do ABC. To what degree did we meet that? And let's just go around the table on a percentage. You know, have people say, oh, we're 50% there, 75%, we nailed it. 10%. So let's say you have a naysayer or someone in the room that just still hasn't gotten it. That provides you an opportunity to say, well, what would it have taken to move behind the 10%? Or you wait for that person at the end of the meeting and they've heard all of these other numbers. It still gives you an opportunity to talk about it. People become dissatisfied when they do not have clarity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that ties it together really nicely. Well, we're nearing the end of our time. I just want to do one last check on the phones. Teria, anyone there?
No, there are no participants in the phone queue.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Well, that does bring us to the close of our session. And again, I want to thank you, our presenter, Jewel Ware, for all of your insights and expertise around meetings. I also want to thank our production team, Joanne Lau and Bethany DeSablon at Education Northwest. And thanks to all of our participants for your contributions and participation in this session. I invite you to join one of our upcoming webinars in October. We have a couple scheduled. First is Managing Up, which is about navigating the VISTA supervisor relationship on October 19th. And then Starting Off Right, Professional Workplace Success, October 24th. Same time here in WebEx. We hope to see you all again soon. Thank you all for your participation.
This concludes